Hi, welcome to Loft 801. My name is Diego, and today I'm talking about Snow White. Okay, obviously, I'm not talking about the OG 1937 Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. I am talking about the latest Disney live-action remake, and I hate to say it, but this movie is the epitome of everything Disney has done wrong over the last decade. Gosh, this review is going to sound so based. I am not avoiding any spoilers in this review because this is not a movie that I would recommend for you or your kids. If you want to see this movie blindly, then please click away. I'm going to preface this review with the importance of the 1937 Snow White. It was Disney's first animated feature film, and it forever changed the landscape of animation and storytelling in cinema. It was an immediate critical and commercial success, earning Walt Disney an honorary Oscar. At its core, Snow White is a timeless fairy tale about good versus evil, beauty versus envy, and kindness versus cruelty. From the opening credits to the final kiss, the film was like stepping into a storybook. Snow White was inspired by the Brothers Grimm fairy tale of the same name. Snow White was given her name because her skin was as white as snow, her lips were as red as blood, and her hair was as black as ebony. That is a pretty clear-cut description of what Snow White should look like. Pale skin was seen as a sign of wealth and leisure because darker, tan skin was often associated with manual labor and exposure to the sun. While beauty standards have changed, the concept has not. Before moving to the United States, my dad was a very pale, white office Latino worker like me. For over the last 20 years, he's worked as a truck driver, and being in the sun has tanned his face significantly more than mine will ever be. Another contextual thing to consider about the Snow White fairy tale is the Old English. The term fair meant beautiful and not morally good. So, when the magic mirror told the evil queen that Snow White was fairer, it was telling her that Snow White was more beautiful than her. Given all of that context, the magical nostalgic animation, and the historical context, we have a lot to compare and judge this remake against. I'll be honest with you, there were some things I liked about this movie, but ultimately there were a lot more things that I did not like. I'll get the blatant and upfront things out of the way first. I love Rachel Zegler's singing and voice, but she was severely miscast in this role.
She should have been white.
She's Latino like me, but we have different complexions, and unfortunately her olive skin doesn't fit the established description of Snow White. I think respecting the source material of whatever IP you're adapting is very important. If you ignore something as simple as the casting, then it shows that you're willing to ignore larger issues like the narrative. While I'm glad that someone as young as Rachel was cast and that they didn't try to make her look paler in this movie, that doesn't take away from the glaring fact that her skin is not as white as snow. I know it's not easy finding an actress with skin that pale who on top of that can sing. Despite this miscast, Rachel kills it with her vocals. She can clearly hit notes. I thought Waiting on a Wish was fantastic. It is more in tone with Moana, but I'm not going to be too critical of the song because this is a musical, and at the very least, a lot of that music is very enjoyable. What I think could have made this movie better is a Greatest Showman Lauren Allred situation. Have Rachel lend her voice and then cast someone to lip sync like India Isley who fits Snow White's description better. It's not a great solution, but if it worked in The Greatest Showman, then I'm sure they could have made it work here too. The other issue that Rachel faced is makeup and wardrobe. In about a third of the scenes she's in, her hair looks great. It's a bit of a free-flowing bob. In the remainder of the scenes though, it looks really unflattering. I don't know why the bob is so short, or why they pressed her hair so much, or why they even got rid of her red bow. The red bow is what helped the hair not look so goofy. On top of that, this movie is very yellow and golden. I understand they wanted the forest to feel warm, but drenching everything in a pea hue does not look good. It just made everything feel fake, staged, and bland. It also makes her dress, specifically the top, look cyan instead of royal blue. I know these are nitpicks, but when you combine everything together, you get a character that looks silly rather than elegant. All of these issues add up and make it hard to believe that Snow White is more fair than Gal Gadot's evil queen. Rachel and Gal are both beautiful women, but in this movie, the evil queen looks stunning while Snow White doesn't. For the narrative of this movie, beauty doesn't matter. It's a blatant rewrite of the original source material. This movie explicitly states that fairness is about being a just and morally good leader. This is a nice concept, but it completely undermines the evil queen as a villain. If morality is the metric for fairness, there is no point to the queen being evil or wanting Snow White dead. Even when Snow White bites the poisoned apple, which looked sick, there is zero reason for the magic mirror to tell the queen that she's the fairest. There are hundreds hundreds of villagers who I'm sure their morality is much better than the queen's. There is no way she would have ever been the fairest unless she committed mass executions. This is just one example of where at its core this movie starts to fall apart. I will cover a lot more issues, but I do want to touch on Gal Gadot's acting. Contrary to everybody else, I am not a Gal Gadot hater. I don't think she's the best actress by any means, but she is certainly not as bad as people say. In fact, I think she's cast very well for this movie. There are some moments where her accent makes her sound a little stiff, but her voice largely works for the evil queen. Not just that, she looks like the evil queen, and I appreciated her singing numbers too, even if it was someone else vocalizing and there was a lot of auto-tune. I genuinely think she was one of the highlights of this movie. Before I hop back into the negative side of things, casting and CGI aside, one of the things I liked about this film is the overall tone and feel, at least for the first third of the movie. The first third of this movie is largely a one-for-one of the original animation, and I think that's why it works pretty well. Snow White's escape from the huntsman into the forest is great. The dwarves' mining is great. Snow White's interactions and cleaning with the dwarves is great. Unfortunately, this is where the narrative diverges and the movie loses a lot of its magic and goodwill. For context, the production of this movie was hellish. I am a firm believer that the writers, producers, and directors of this movie should not be in the filmmaking industry. I don't respect people and companies who take a beloved IP and twist it for a modern audience. During production, someone decided that the dwarves in this movie would be offensive and instead decided to have 7 bandits. Contrary to what the producers and Peter Dinklage said, there was nothing controversial about having the dwarves. It is not offensive. This is an established fantasy like The Witcher and The Lord of the Rings. Dwarves are a fictional, often humanoid race known for their short stature, strong beards, and skills in mining, crafting, and metalworking, and are often depicted living in mountains or underground. Again, there is nothing offensive about the concept of a fantasy dwarf. There is also nothing offensive about casting actors who have dwarfism as the dwarves in this movie. Real-life dwarfism and fantasy dwarves are not the same thing, and casting actors with dwarfism helps their marginalized community. I don't care what Disney or the producers of this movie say. The original script of this movie completely removed the dwarves, and it's painfully obvious that they were meant to be replaced with the DEI CW looking bandits. If the intent was to replace the dwarves, then the bandits could have at the very least taken inspiration from another fairy tale, Robin Hood and His Merry Men. That would have been much more enjoyable. Anyways, when the leaked image of the bandits circulated the internet, there was a pretty big backlash against the dwarves being cut. The PR around this movie was nightmarish. So much so that Disney got spooked and had to rewrite the dwarves back in. However, since the bandits were already cast and filmed, and since they were DEI hires, there was no way Disney could remove them from this movie. This is another one of the core issues this movie has. Because this movie tries so hard to be inclusive and not be offensive, it does not meet any audience expectations. The woke crowd who wanted the bandits don't like the dwarves. The traditional crowd who wanted the dwarves don't like the bandits, and they don't like the dwarves. Because despite putting the dwarves back into this movie, Disney made the god-awful decision to mocap the actors and use CGI. The CGI dwarves look painfully awful. Sure, they look like the cartoon characters, but not in a good way. It's like when you take SpongeBob or Patrick and make them photorealistic. They give uncanny vibes. They should have instead done something similar to the way the Lord of the Rings handles their dwarves. Excluding the Rings of Power, their dwarves look great. I hate to beat a dead horse, but the other issue with the bandits in this movie is that they feel very forced. None of their scenes feel natural or free-flowing. Like Captain America: Brave New World, this movie was obviously chopped to pieces and glued back together. The transitions from scene to scene don't make sense because a lot of the time they don't exist. Jonathan, who is the prince character in this movie, goes from being locked away in the Queen's dungeon to Snow White's funeral in about 10 seconds. I'm sure this movie was supposed to be over 2 hours long because there are obviously large chunks missing from this movie. The runtime is 1 hour and 49 minutes, which is 26 minutes longer than the original animation. Whether they chopped things out because they were bad or wanted to be closer to the original runtime, this movie feels rushed, especially after the first third. To say something positive, at the very least, I did like the character of Jonathan. Some people might disagree with me, but I don't think he's an afterthought character. I think his scenes with Snow White had better direction than most of the other scenes. Sadly, that is where my praise for him ends. is. He doesn't really have a character arc other than to support and prop up the princess. He's a very shallow character who can't get anything done, and the chemistry between him and Snow White isn't believable. Not just that, but this movie doesn't give us any time to see them struggle together and grow together. That is another one of the core issues with this movie. There is no character development. Whether it's Jonathan, Snow White, the dwarves, the bandits, or even the queen, every character feels very shallow and poorly written. This is apparent throughout the entire movie, but gets hammered home during the non-existent climax. The lack of character development results in a lack of stakes. Rather than having the dwarves and Jonathan fight the queen to avenge the princess, Snow White is revived prior to the confrontation with the queen. Instead of an actual climax, we get Snow White uniting the people by saying she remembers all of them, even though she hasn't seen them for 8 years. Everyone, including the guards, turn their backs to the queen, so she destroys her magic mirror, and that causes her to die. It is the most bland way to end this movie because at no point does Snow White feel like she is in danger of dying. The climax is literally just characters talking to each other, which is one of the biggest sins this movie commits. This movie explains every situation and feeling rather than showing us every situation and feeling. If the queen is truly evil, then show us the people and how they're suffering. If Snow White has a connection with animals, then take time to show us that connection. If she cares for her people, then show us that she cares. If Jonathan is her true love, then show us. You can't tell us what to think or feel if what you're showing us does not align with that. It completely undermines any credibility the movie has. One final positive thing I want to say before I start wrapping up is that the animals were cute. I genuinely hope Disney does not do a live action Bambi, but if they were, at least the animals they use would look cute. The woodland creatures were great in this movie, and I think they could have used a little more screen time. The final thing I want to say is that this movie stood no chance of being successful, largely because of Rachel. Her entire PR tour was spent bashing the original source material, calling it weird, dated, and saying that the prince was written out of the story because this movie is about how the princess could do it all on her own. That was pretty bad, but it was long enough ago that people had started to forget those comments. Unfortunately, her post-election comments are what really nailed the coffin on this movie. Half the country voted for this guy, and you told them that you don't want their business and that they should never know peace. That is a pretty brazen thing to say, and I'm sure your pro-Palestine social media content put you at odds with your Israeli co-star. I hate to say it, but I don't think Rachel is going to get any big roles anytime soon. She was a huge liability for Disney and this movie. So yeah, this movie is a mess. There were glimmers of charm, especially in the first third. Some of the music worked, and I surprisingly liked Gal Gadot as the evil queen, but the overall product collapses under the weight of poor writing, bad creative decisions, jumbled edits, and a complete misunderstanding of the source material. I desperately wanted to like this movie because I respect the legacy of Disney animation, and I'm sure the cast and crew worked really hard behind the scenes despite all the chaos. But at the end of the day, you can't slap gold lighting and modern values on a classic story, ignore its foundation, and expect people to be enchanted. Snow White isn't supposed to be a political female empowerment statement or a bland corporate exercise. It's supposed to be a fairy tale, a timeless one. And sadly, this remake proves Disney doesn't understand what made their originals magical in the first place. I don't think you'll enjoy it, and if you're a parent, I don't think your kids will get much value out of this movie. Snow White is unfortunately not a movie that I would recommend watching. Thank you for listening to my review of Snow White. If you enjoyed the content, leave a like and hit subscribe. If you did not enjoy the content, thank you for sticking around. As always, I would love to read what you have to say, so leave a comment and let me know what you're thinking. Also, if there's something you want to see reviewed, don't forget to let me know and I will do my best to get to it. Lastly, if you want to see some more from me, then you can check out my vlogs linked up above or my podcast, Good Friends. Again, thank you for watching. My name is Diego and I will see you next time.